And I will have my various colleagues joining in here for reflections from the sessions that all of us were listening to and were tuned into. I was looking at the, just before I was preparing for this session, I was looking at the key objectives of the forum and what we had set out to, achieve through this forum. And the three, and to be very honest, we were very anxious about, organizing this for the first time virtually, how it's going to go. And, with so many different puzzles and different pieces to put together for this puzzle. One of the key objectives was on raising awareness for this particular, raising awareness on business and human rights in the region. And I'm so delighted to have seen that strength and momentum. We've had representation. It truly became a multi-stakeholder consultation where we've had, multi-stakeholder forum where we had academia, businesses, CSOs, defenders, governments, each one of you joining in, and thank you for making it, so successful, at least, in terms of, I personally feel that we've reached out to a larger number of people. Perhaps we would have not been able to reach out, if it was in-person forum. There were various sessions that track the progress that the government has, the governments have made on implementing the UN guiding principles. And I think we did hear from the government representatives. We also heard from the civil society organizations on how the development of NAP has influenced or impacted situation on ground. We heard lots of examples of how businesses have taken a role in, businesses have taken a role in providing solutions, particularly in the context of economic recovery due to COVID-19. And we heard also lots and lots of examples of, how businesses need to do a lot more and they have not been doing enough. So I think that's where at least I believe, the objectives that we've set out to be achieved to some extent. And I'm sure a lot needs to be done. This is perhaps just the beginning as we're moving into a recovery phase. But we do realize that's a lot more needs to be done. But I think it was a great way to sort of bring in people together and hear from various perspectives on what the key takeaways were. With me, I have my colleagues joining in for this particular session. We are looking at reflections from some of the sessions that all of us have been tuning into. In terms of the format of this session, I will invite my colleagues one by one, and each one will have sort of 3 minutes to share their reflections and suggestions for the forums next year. There'll also be an opportunity for the participants to ask questions. So please do add your questions in the question and answer toggle. And then we'll try and bring back, it'll be good to hear from you, the reflections also from the participants, for those who have been listening to these conversations. So please do share your reflections and suggestions that you have for the forum. And then we'll try to respond to some of your questions in the end. Thank you, everyone. And with that, I would like to invite Livio Sarandria, who is the lead advisor and team leader of the Business and Human Rights Asia UN Development Program. Livio, over to you.
Thank you, Harpreet, for giving me the floor. I'd like to start a first reflection on the modality that we used this year. The virtual modality that we used was successful. I mean, you said that the forums are largely about awareness, and this year, by having 6,000 people, we have increased tenfold the outreach that we had last year, which is 600. And I think there is somehow no turning back from that. I don't know how the next forum will look like, whether it will be an hybrid or a total virtual once again, but in one way or another, there will be a part that will be virtual, because the outreach opportunity is incredible and we should keep seizing it. One downside of it, it's probably the missed opportunity of doing the networking that we all know is a central part of the face-to-face forums. That is something where if we go for a virtual forum again, we need to perhaps work a little bit more on. That networking, that consultation, that peer learning that sometimes happens even more candidly over coffee, over lunch, is something that we probably have missed. And so we had to find a way next year to address it in that way. Let me go on one substantive reflection as well that I bring from the human rights due diligence session and the NAP one where I was. And I'll summarize it with with the line that I picked up from Anita Ramasastry, line of this business and human rights train picking up speed. I think summarizes a lot of what we have heard these days. A train that is picking up speed, even in time of COVID-19, where there are increased challenges, no doubt. But perhaps counterintuitively, in this moment of crisis, we have heard a lot, and perhaps from some even more, speaking about the importance of sustainability, of responsible business to build back better. So we have a great opportunity ahead of us. We should look at the future, and it ties very well with the initiative, which I'm sure most of those who are listening in tuned into with, the new project of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights on the next decade of business and human rights. The UNGPs are turning 10 next year. We have 1 year of reflection on that. The UNDP will be delighted to contribute to that. Next forum will basically fall 1 week before the UNGPs turn 10. So I think next forum should be about the future ahead, and 12 months to reflect on that. One very last point, I'm hoping the next year at the forum, which may be an hybrid, we give a little bit more of emphasis on the pillar 3. We've had a great NHRI session. I would like to hear the courts. I would like to discuss a little bit more about the non-state remedies. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Harpreet.
Thank you. Thank you, Livio. And now I would like to invite Freddie, who's the Program Manager for Responsible Supply Chains in Asia Program with International Labour Organization. Freddie, over to you.
Harpreet, colleagues, thank you very much. Thank you to all the audience for joining us for these 3 intense days, well, 4 tomorrow. We had the opportunity to bring the voice from a broad range of actors from the ILO perspective, our constituents. We have also joining us the CSOs, universities, and different institutions in the governments. Well, we see that through the sessions of this forum, we have seen, unfortunately, how the current COVID-19 pandemics had highlighted some of the inequalities and injustices for workers, but also for small and micro businesses. These inequalities were already there before COVID, but have been exacerbated by the current conditions. This has been discussed, well, in the opening plenary, but also in a couple of the sessions in which I have participated. Some of the sessions have highlighted also that there have been some that have been affected more than others in the current pandemic. Informal workers, and among them, of course, women, migrant workers, and workers with disabilities, which are among the most affected, and that require special attention by the public policymakers and of course, businesses and workers' organizations. It is, from our perspective, well, it was clear that more than ever, international labor standards remain very relevant, a very relevant framework to start building the institutions, but also policies and responses to assist the workers, businesses, and the economy in general. So the international labor standards need to be the guiding framework for these interventions, for the dialogues, for the design and the implementation of the policies. It was highlighted by some of the speakers, the importance of coordination and partnerships and how they are critical to address the challenges faced by the workers, by the businesses in the current pandemic, and the relevance also to work with different stakeholders in the economy in general, but also in production networks such as the global supply chains, the global framework agreements, as well as the tripartite commissions to work together on the policies and the responses for the current crisis, were highlighted as a good way to coordinate and work together in partnership. From some of the speakers, the message has been that the current situation can be turned into an opportunity to build a better normal that supports the vulnerable first, an opportunity also to put forward an agenda of social justice, which puts humans at the center of the agenda, and to continue trying to achieve the goals set in the Agenda 2030. Well, I'll leave it at this point from our side. Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie. I would now like to invite Marit Niels, who's the Economic Affairs Officer at ESCAP. Marit, over to you.
Thank you, Harpreet, and thank you to all the speakers and participants for joining in these sessions. A few observations from the discussions that we have been involved in particular the finance and climate change discussions. Like Livio, I thought I'll start with quoting one of the speakers who said that COVID has shown that without helping people and the planet, there is no helping the economy. And I think this really shows a little bit the where these discussions have the focus of these discussions and what has come out in many of these discussions. That on a philosophical note, I think the situation has given some hope that change is possible, and that even in a pandemic situation, or perhaps because of it, that you get to see what really matters, and that really people and the planet needs to come first. Some of the discussions have also pointed out a bit the dichotomy between the short-termism and long-termism, whereas it was seen perhaps before the crisis that some things that were seen as long-term then actually turns out to be more short-term than people think, and that, for example, like biodiversity and other crises, the climate crisis too, that things cannot necessarily wait, and that we need to deal with issues now. And that, I think, will impact it will impact investments, it will impact how decisions will be taken going forward. What will be important and what will probably come out of this is how business and the finance sector will rebalance this focus between the long term and short term. How they view risk will change, how supply chains operate will change, and how the risk and speed is weighted in the decisions on how companies run their supply chains, and how the risk factor is looking different for investors when they are looking at how to invest. Another observation is that there seems to be increasing awareness of the need to take into environmental and social criteria in investment decisions in all sorts of players, business and finance sector. But there are still some gaps in the how, and this might be where we need to put more focus going forward into the how. At ESCAP, we will bring these discussions to the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, and including some follow-up around climate activities that links to the session this week. We will also have a business forum at the end of October, where we hope to follow on some of these discussions. It will focus around supply chains, the future of supply chains. And as next year, as Harpreet and Livio were pointing out, I think we see a huge possibility for continuing with a virtual forum, because it gives such a larger potential of outreach and with a much lower carbon footprint. So this was one of the exciting aspects of this year's forum that we definitely think we should build on and just make it even more inclusive next year.
Thanks, Marit. Thanks, Marit. Ida, who's the Regional Child Rights and Business Manager at Unicef. Over to you, Ida.
Thank you, and thank you, Harpreet, and thank you all. Thanks for the co-organizers and all the participants. It's been an incredible, lively, and rich 3 days. I have learned a lot, and it's been really thrilling to be part of this kind of regional knowledge sharing and exchange. It's really encouraging that despite everything happening, that we can come together and still have these meaningful discussions and exchanges. And especially really an opportunity to look on ways forward, how we can reimagine a better future coming out of COVID. And from UNICEF's perspective, we also all too often see that children are not recognized as the relevant stakeholders or rights holder groups by businesses. beyond the very real concern of child labor, which of course remains a very grave issue. But there are so many other ways that children are impacted by business, both directly and indirectly. So in this forum, we were trying to spotlight some of those ways, and we convened sessions on the ways that children are adversely impacted by the pandemic and specific business models and practices, specifically linked to, for example, family-friendly workplace policies or the lack of them, but also ways that marketing and advertising may be using negative gender stereotypes that has a huge impact on children's gender socialization. So for the session that we were leading on Tuesday on the role of business and mitigating the social impact on workers and their families, it was really, it brought together a really diverse panel from across the region and from different speakers. And I think here it was really, I can't do justice in summing it up in just a few notes, but there were some key takeaways, and it was that there is an opportunity to turn the immense negative impacts of COVID-19 into some real opportunities for businesses as well, in terms of how they can change their business models and practices, in terms of how they can support parents or workers that are parents to meet childcare needs, for example, to facilitate that they can help their children's access to education, and overall just in terms of really looking at ways that things they hadn't done before is now possible, because COVID-19 has also taught us that new ways of working are possible. We also saw that in the session around building back gender equal, we had a great number of participants and panelists, also from industry, and we can really see how industries has a huge role to play in terms of transforming attitudes and norms that perpetuate gender-based discrimination in the workplace and in the marketplace and in the community. So this really focused on the urgency brought forward by COVID-19 as well, in terms of how can we start changing these adverse impacts on women and girls. So for UNICEF, I mean, we hope that that this kind of forum can continue in this way, because despite my initial reluctance, because I was so used to and enjoyed going to the in-person forums, I really see that there is a huge opportunity for us to keep and continue this kind of exchange and learning virtually. So looking forward to also working with the co-organizers on future such events. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ida. Katja Friedwald, who's the Regional Program Manager at We Empower Asia, UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Katja, some reflections from your end.
Thank you very much, Harpreet. I mean, a lot has been said already, but obviously from a UN Women perspective, I'm gonna put the lens on gender. And I have to say that I'm extremely delighted not only to see that I think there were never ever so many gender sessions in a business and human rights forum in the region, but more also that gender was a part of many sessions. So not only gender as part or as individual sessions, but I think that it was really cross-cutting. It's a testimonial on not only the collaboration with all of our stakeholders, but amongst UN agencies as well. I think it was really enlightening for me to really work with UNICEF. Ida just mentioned the session that we co-shared together on building back gender equal. I think it was really great to see reunite the different perspectives into these sessions. And what I enjoyed mostly about our sessions, particularly that we shared, is really the action orientation of the discussion. So really kind of looking together on how can we practically drive things forward. So in the space, for example, around building gender equal together, I think we have started a journey with different companies on moving a global movement around unstereotyping into the region. We have heard that countries are starting to picking that up. We have also heard from some of our sessions that there is really still a big need for transparency. So I think the recognition we are there, that people recognize the importance of gender, but very often data is still missing. And so I think one of the big takeouts for us was also more transparency and more advocacy around collecting gender disaggregated data. I think still something which is missing. I have to say my one of my favorite sessions, or where I felt the biggest engagement, was our session on small matters. So really working with young entrepreneurs, with female entrepreneurs, and particularly with social enterprises. And I think considering that this is a big part of our economy here, it was such an important session also in terms of diversity, to bring young voices into the room, and with very different solutions, particularly in the crisis. The examples how young women in the Philippines supported the government on COVID response through artificial intelligence, for example. I mean, really, really great examples where lots of learning can be taken from. So I think it's important for the future to make sure that we keep these young voices being part of that, of our forum. And then I think to close it maybe from a UN Women perspective, I think we are extremely hopeful that issues that have been surfaced so much in the last couple of weeks, like unpaid care work, and really the discussion around increased violence women are facing, we didn't shy away of this discussion. So we had a couple of sessions, particularly also around migrant workers, where we really had good feedback from civil society and organizations on really action that needs to be taken forward. So overall, I found it was a very action-oriented forum, at least for the sessions that I had the pleasure to participate on. So huge thank you for all the co-organizers on behalf of UN Women, but particularly all the participants that made this such an enrichment for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Katya. I'm now going to move on to Professor Surya Deva, the member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Surya, your reflections, please.
Thank you, Harpreet, and thank you all the colleagues who co-organized this forum. It's a really great pleasure working with all of you, and all the audience and other panelists who participated in this forum for 3 days. As you can imagine, I could not attend all the sessions. Some of the sessions were parallel as well. But based on the sessions that I participated in different roles, I would like to highlight 3 substantive takeaways for me. First is that there is a growing awareness about business and human rights issues in Asia Pacific, because that is the region we are focusing. Of course, I am fully aware that there are participants joining globally, but I would like to focus my reflections on Asia Pacific. So there's definitely a growing awareness about BHR issues, and there's a growing awareness about states and companies understanding the importance of UN guiding principles and making a commitment to implement them. But I think still, in terms of the action, the progress is too little and too slow. So they're making commitment, but when it comes to action, both the governments and the companies can do much more better, in my view. And the number of companies, because we are talking about millions and millions of companies in Asia Pacific, right? So, and we have close to, let us say, 50 plus states. So if you look at the number of states in Asia Pacific and number of companies operating here, I think the progress in terms of action, I think we need to work harder to improve that pace. My second point is in terms of, I felt that the forum reflected a continued fundamental tension between development, economic development on the one hand, and human rights, environment, climate on the other hand. I think we should remove this tension. We should bring them together and integrate human rights, environmental issues, climate considerations into the very idea of development. Because if we want to achieve inclusive, sustainable, and a more equal world, a better society for all of us, leaving no one behind, we should not see this conflict or contradiction. There's no sequencing here, that let us first develop fast and then we take about human rights later. So I think this mindset of countries in which they're obsessed with this idea of inviting investors and companies into the country and putting human rights and the environment or the climate issues at the back burner is fundamentally a misconceived idea. And I think we should encourage all the stakeholders to overcome this perception. My third takeaway is that I see continued pain and suffering of civil society organizations, rights holders, and human rights defenders. And I think in many sessions, this came out very clearly. And the related point is about lack of corporate accountability. If you read newspapers anywhere, any country, any region, you will always find instances of human rights abuses linked to businesses. And it is not about COVID. Even in pre-COVID era, we had those situations, and sometimes things may get worse. Of course, there are good practices as well, so I'm not ignoring those, but overall, the situation, in my view, is not improving fast enough for CSOs and human rights defenders. And I think we need to do more on that. So as a way forward, as Livio mentioned, and you may have heard my colleague my colleague Dante talked about on the opening day, the working group is starting a new project on the 10 years of the UN Guiding Principles. What have we achieved in those 10 years? And where do we want to go next 10 years? And I have three quick suggestions where we should be going. That's not the working group view because we need to still discuss about the project, but that's my personal reflection based on what I gained from this forum. First is that we need to understand human rights due diligence in a more holistic manner. It's not merely about human rights. It's also about labor rights. It's also about environmental issues. It's also about climate change issues. So everything has to be integrated into this idea of human rights due diligence or impact assessment, and it has to be mandatory. There is no option for anyone to decide to do it or not do it. And whether it is a normal time or COVID situation, this must be a non-negotiable thing that every business has to do it as per the UN Guiding Principles. That is my first way going forward. My second suggestion is that we must place rights and rights holders at the center of this whole idea of development and profit making. Companies should not treat workers as a commodity. It's not a commodity that you use to make money and discharge. Rather, they should be part and partial of this. If we have to achieve sustainable development goals and achieve the objective of leaving no one behind, human rights and the rights holders must be the central component of this idea of development and profit making. And you should conceive development talking to them. So decisions about development should not be made in the capital of a country and then you consult later on in a symbolic way. Rather, we should conceive a bottom-up idea of development, that what kind of development people are asking for, and then design policies and frameworks on that. And of course, we have to be sensitive here to the different rights holders, a point which is very well made during the forum, whether these are children, women, indigenous communities, LGBTI communities, migrant workers. They're all rights holders, but they may be impacted differently. And that's why sensitivity to their unique experiences and differences must be acknowledged. My last point is accountability. Accountability of the government as well as the business actors. If they violate human rights, if they do not conduct human rights due diligence properly, it must be there. Because lack of accountability means they're free riders, and free riders are not going to create a level playing field. So my suggestion going forward is we need to strengthen, work together and strengthen accountability of free riders, whether these are states or companies or others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Surya. And last but not the least, I would like to invite Golda Benjamin, who's from the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. And I would also like to take this opportunity to the Business and Human Rights Resource Center for helping us organize this forum and bringing in the civil society voices and the voices of defenders into the conversations at the forum. Golda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Harpreet. I'd like to begin with the words of one of the many human rights defenders who spoke in the sessions today. And she said that I am one of the few privileged activists who is able to tell my story to the international community. And I find those words very powerful because we all know the importance of inclusivity, not just in a fora like the UN Forum, but also more importantly, when governments and businesses plan short and long-term responses to the pandemic and the structural inequalities that exist in our world today. I'm very happy that I'm seeing more and more women speakers. In fact, in my understanding, there are more women speakers in this forum this year. And I look forward to more speakers from indigenous peoples, LGBTQI, differently abled. And I was so happy as a teacher that even teachers of business and human rights now have a session in the UN Forum. Second, it struck me that there is a continued importance for documentation of the challenges faced by the vulnerable, truth telling, so that we can understand not just the trends, but the evolving nature of these challenges and align our responses based on evidence and, more importantly, based on truthful stories from the most vulnerable. So for us at the Resource Center, we'd like this intervention to be a statement of commitment. We will continue to document and hold companies accountable. For example, we continue to document attacks against human rights defenders in our portal. We're building a global SLAPS database to understand the trends and the policy responses of governments and businesses to these kinds of attacks. Times are difficult, and this is precisely why we are all here working. The best practices we learned about during this forum, and more importantly, the severe violations of rights that were narrated by many defenders in open and closed sessions, should hopefully guide governments, businesses, and civil society in developing strong and effective response. Because we now know, and we cannot make any excuses, we know what is needed, and mentally and fundamentally, we know what is possible. So I look forward to working with everyone to make sure that business and human rights will be a prime and priority for all stakeholders, because there's no other choice but to put human rights at the center of all our actions. Thank you, Harpreet.
Thank you, Golda. And now I would like to open the floor for quick reflections. Please keep your reflections, to just very focused. And if you have any specific, if you have any specific recommendations, please do say so. I see Wakil Uddin who sent a message to speak. Can technical team, Wakil, can you unmute yourself and come in here?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, this is Wakil. I'm basically from Pakistan and working in human rights with exclusive emphasis in children's rights. So just got a question from all the worthy panelists. Here in Asia, basically in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, most of the people they're living below poverty line. So in most of the daily wages who have been locked down for the last few weeks, and they're unable to earn their subsistence. So is there any policy or is there any mechanism from United Nations sides so that they can cope with this situation or just to provide an opportunity for them to live a respectable life? Because, it's a matter of life and death for them. They've been locked down and they are unable to earn their subsistence. So it's a very serious issue here in Pakistan, especially I live in a province which is known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, close to the Afghanistan border. Most of the people, they're living below this poverty line, and it's very hard for the daily wages to live there, earn food. So is there any mechanism or is there any recommendation? Is there any suggestion from the worthy panelists so that we can convey this recommendation to the local government here in Pakistan? Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Wakil. If any of the co-organizers would like to respond, but I just also do want to take this opportunity to remind all the participants joining us here, that this is a session which is basically, to hear from you the reflections about the forum and suggestions and recommendations for the upcoming forums. I think we've had a number of sessions addressing many of these issues, and we understand and we realize that not all of your questions may not have been answered during the main sessions, but for the speakers ahead, if you could just keep your reflections particularly on the entire forum and looking at more of a holistic view rather than just bringing in very specific issues which we kind of covered more or less, at least in the individual sessions. Thank you.
Maybe just a quick note. I think other UN agencies have done a lot of research. ILO has done a lot also, but I think as a quick answer in general, it would be government's role to provide money to people who are suffering in the crisis. And this has indeed been done in many countries. For example, in Thailand, 5,000 baht have been given to people who are suffering from the COVID crisis. The UN doesn't have funding to distribute money in that way that you're describing. That is a government role. That would be my quick reaction.
If I may add a quick footnote, that the relevance of international cooperation and assistance also becomes quite relevant in such cases. So if a particular country does not have resources, then other countries who may have a little bit more resources in such a crisis, they should come forward and assist. And I think at the same time, there are more resourceful people in society in each and every country. Even in developing countries, there are people who are more rich. They should come forward to share those resources, as well as there is a responsibility, of course, on the part of companies, which might have made a lot of profit in the past from these workers. So in a difficult time, they should come forward. So it's a collective effort on the part of governments working together, businesses working together, UN agencies working together, and all of us, individuals working together to overcome this crisis. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Harpreet, if I may, well, in the third monitor that the ILO produced for the current pandemic, one of the recommendations to the governments is the development of strong labor market institutions and comprehensive and also well-resourced social protection systems. And that includes, of course, care policies, but also job-rich recovery strategies, which include infrastructure, for instance, to kick automatically the economies while benefiting the workers and vulnerable and informal workers in different countries. So yeah, it's more specificities on this. You can find them in the third ILO monitor that was produced in the context of the current pandemic. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Freddie.
Can I just add then? I think maybe to add to my answer, that the role of the UN is more on this policy side, that we work with governments to recommend actions, and a lot of the recommendations coming forward has been on the need for social protection, increased social protection and social security in terms of the longer term response for a crisis. It doesn't solve the problem in the short term, but it's what we need to do in the long term.
Can I add, Harpreet, that UNDP is having an important part into the effort to support governments in this socio-economic recovery effort. And UNDP has country offices in every country, including Pakistan. I would be surprised if a country office is not aware already of this particular issue. But you may want to make them make sure that they are aware of this. They don't have their own funding or their own ability to help, but they do support the recovery effort and they do advise the government. So feel free to contact our country office. One of the reasons why UNDP has country office is to be closer to the needs of the people. And so you may want to approach our country office and some field offices that we have in the same country to make sure they are aware of this problem, which again, I would be surprised if they aren't already. Thank you.
Thanks, Livio. I would now like to invite Dr. Meera Shiva. Dr. Meera, I see you have a question here. Would you like to go ahead and ask your question? Miss Irene, can we unmute Dr. Meera?
Dr. Meera is going to have to unmute herself.
All right, while we are waiting for her, maybe I can invite Krishnendu Mukherjee. Krishnendu, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, good morning, everyone. At least it's morning in London. I just wanted to ask whether there seemed to be a move, or at least some people are saying there was a move to having supply chains more national, more local and more national, even before COVID. And because of the problems with supply chains during the COVID crisis, it would mean that supply chains will become increasingly more localized. Do panelists think that's the case, or do they think that supply chains will continue to be transnational?
Do you want me to take this question?
Sure, sure.
I think I briefly answered this question, Krishnendu, in the box, but I think not everything will change because of COVID, but it is quite possible that some companies will think about their supply chains, because when the supply chains are spread globally, of course, there are cost savings, but there are also implications in terms of time, and there is shipping cost. So sometimes companies may think, is it better for some of the supply chain parts or partners to be closer to where you want to sell those products and services? So I don't think everything will change, but I think something is likely to change. The other implication, in my view, which we should not ignore, is automation and artificial intelligence. So I think those technologies are also going to have some impact in the future on how supply chains are connected. Of course, some countries are taking kind of anti-globalization or very nationalistic view of production services. This is not the right approach in my view, but at the same time, of course, if we can source and supply things locally, it is better for the climate also. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Thanks, Krishnendu. Dr. Meera Shiva, you want to try again? Because I think that really is the last question or the last reflection that we can take from the floor. Dr. Shiva, can you unmute yourself?
Otherwise, Harpreet, maybe I can just add a little bit on the supply chain question.
Sure. Sure.
I think as the person asking the question was pointing out, some of these changes were already taking place pre-COVID, partly related to ongoing trade wars. And so I think a lot of companies were already thinking of how to create more redundancy in their supply chains, how to basically have more options in terms of where they're sourcing things from. And this will probably continue as companies are reassessing risk, basically. So the view of what risks there are in terms of your ability to continue producing will look different post-COVID. It may not look so dramatically different. I think trade will continue because it's looking for competitive advantages and looking to produce where things are most efficiently produced. So it's not always the case that it's better to produce near, but surely some things will move nearer and some things will just have more supply chains, I think. So we will see some change, but maybe perhaps not as dramatic as
Sure.
one might think at first instance.
Thanks, Marit. I'm just going to go ahead and read Dr. Shiva's question. She says, thank you for the RBHR program. With increasing inequities in our region, with billionaires, trillionaires on one hand and destitution of millions, what is the most urgent action you all recommend? Thank you, Professor Deva, for your comments and other panelists. Surya, you want to answer that? And if you could please keep your answers very, very brief. This is really the last question that we can take from the floor. Thank you.
I think I briefly answered that question already, but I will repeat what I said. I think we need to rebuild a new economic order, in my view. We need to build an order in which some people are not able to become so rich and then they donate part of their money to society back. We need to create a system which is fair and equal for everyone. And we need to deal with this economic inequality and climate change, in my view, very urgently. So COVID-19 is a wake-up call for us. If we do not wake up, it could be something else coming 2 years from now, 5 years from now. We need to fix the system fundamentally, which is unfair in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Would anybody else like to come in on this one? All right. Yeah, I don't see any hands or anybody coming in here, but thank you very much. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you. Thanks the co-organizers and various, thanks the co-organizers as well as the various partners, including UNEP, OHCHR, OECD, Business and Human Rights Resource Center, Forum Asia, and I think about 32 additional partners who've joined us for the RBHR forum. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who was also sort of behind the scenes. I know many of us have been on the sessions and speaking on the panels, but there's been a big team that's been working at the back end to ensure all your technical sessions go smoothly. Really sort of bringing everything together. So thank you very much, Amy, Victoria, Kevin. If you could also just switch on your cameras, Irene and Hermes for all the help with their technical support. Thank you very much. And Sophia is another colleague who's supported us on various sessions. I see Kevin on the other window. Thank you very much. I'm trying to see who all are there. So that's Sean. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And this really wouldn't have been possible to organize this without support, support from all of you. I don't see some of the colleagues who've also joined us and worked with us, but definitely Pete and Sasivan from ILO, they were again very, very crucial to help us organizing this. So thank you very much, everyone. This is a closing session. This perhaps we look at more it as a way forward, but don't forget, this is just the closing for the first 3 days. We do have tomorrow, I think about some 12 sessions and really interesting sessions on various thematic areas. So please join in and tune in tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you on the other side of the screen tomorrow again. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day, good evening, and good night. Not sure where all you're joining from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.